The day I accidentally spilled hot coffee on the most dangerous man in Chicago. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and a gas station granola bar. That was my breakfast. That was most of my breakfasts back then. I'd been working the morning shift at St. Raphael's for 3 years. Not as a nurse yet, I was still finishing my clinicals, but as a patient intake coordinator, which is a fancy way of saying I answered phones, sorted paperwork, and made sure the ER waiting room didn't turn into complete chaos before 8 a.m. The hospital was one of those old brick buildings on the north side that smelled like antiseptic and burnt coffee, no matter what time of day you walked in. I loved it, honestly. There was something about the rhythm of it, the steady hum of the fluorescent lights, the way the nurses moved like water around obstacles, the PA announcements that I'd memorized so well I could mouth along before the words came out. It wasn't glamorous. My student loans were $67,000 at last count. My apartment had a radiator that sounded like it was processing a grudge every night, and my shoes had a hole in the left sole that I'd been meaning to fix for 6 weeks. But I was 26. I was 3 months from my nursing license, and I had a plan. Plans kept me going on the mornings when the granola bars ran out. That particular Tuesday in November started like every other one. Cold, gray, the kind of Chicago morning that reaches right through your coat and reminds you it owns you. I'd grabbed a coffee from the nurse's station, the good stuff from the second-floor lounge, not the tar from the break room, and I was walking back to my desk when the elevator doors opened, and I stepped directly into the path of a man who did not belong there. I knew he didn't belong there the second I saw him. It wasn't his height, though he was tall, well over 6 feet. It wasn't the suit either, though the suit was the kind that doesn't have a price tag because the people who buy them don't ask. It was the way the 2 men behind him moved. Not like visitors, not like family members of a patient, not like anyone who'd ever sat in a waiting room and stared at the ceiling. They moved like they were scanning for threats. They moved like their only job was to keep this particular man alive, and I walked straight into him. The coffee went everywhere. I gasped. He didn't make a sound. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry." I was already reaching for the napkins I kept in my pocket out of habit, pressing them against the front of his jacket before I'd even fully registered what I was doing. This was ear brain, the instinct to act before you thought about it. Contain the damage first. "I'm so sorry, I wasn't looking, Stop." His voice was quiet. That was the first thing I noticed about it. Not loud, not sharp, just absolute. Like the word had weight. I stopped. I looked up. He was looking at me the way you look at something you weren't expecting to find. Not annoyed, not cold. Something else. Something I didn't have a word for yet. "Are you burned?" I asked, because that was still the first thing in my head. The coffee was hot. I'd felt it on my own hand when it splashed back. He blinked. Slowly, like the question surprised him. "No. Let me see your hand." I reached for it before I thought to ask permission. Later I would cringe about that, but in the moment I was still running on intake coordinator autopilot. Assess the situation, check for injury, move on. I turned his hand over. No redness. The coffee had hit his jacket more than his skin. I let go. For a second, neither of us said anything. "I'll pay for the dry cleaning," I said. "I know that's probably... it's an expensive jacket, and I'm sorry, I can give you my... That's not necessary." "I insist, it's my fault." "Here." I was already digging in my pocket for my phone, pulling up my contact info. "If you give me an address, I can send a check or Venmo, or I don't use Venmo." There was something in the way he said it. Not condescending, exactly. More like the word was from a different language he'd heard about, but never needed to learn. I looked at him again. Really looked. He was somewhere in his early 40s, dark hair going silver at the temples, a jaw that looked like it had an opinion about everything, the scar on his cheek. I noticed it then, a thin line running from below his left eye almost to the corner of his mouth. Looked old, years old. He wore it the way you wear something that's been part of you. Long enough, you stop seeing it. "Then give me your email," I said, "and I'll figure something out." One corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile. Something adjacent to one. "Nicholas Vane," he said, "you can find me." He walked past me to the elevator. His 2 shadows followed. The doors closed. I stood there in the hallway holding coffee-damp napkins, heart going about 30 beats faster than normal, and thought, that was a strange thing to say. I Googled him that night. I'm not proud of it, but I also can't say I regret it. Nicholas Vane wasn't hard to find. He had a Wikipedia page, a Forbes profile, and about 12,000 results, the top half of which were business news, and the bottom half of which were things I had to read twice because they didn't seem like they could be about the same person. Officially, CEO of Vane Capital, a private equity firm with holdings across real estate, logistics, and healthcare. Net worth estimated in the low billions. Known for acquiring struggling institutions and, depending on who you asked, either saving them or gutting them. Chicago-born, no family listed, no social media presence to speak of. Unofficially, the search results got murkier. Words like alleged and rumored and sources say showed up a lot. His name appeared near a city councilman's corruption case 3 years ago. Witness, not defendant, but still. There was a photo from a federal investigation press conference where he was walking out of a building in the background, sunglasses on. 2 men behind him that looked very familiar. I closed the laptop. Then I opened it again and read the healthcare acquisitions section more carefully. St. Raphael's was on the list. He had bought us 2 months ago. I hadn't known, or I had known in the abstract way you know things that feel too big to be real. The way you know the hospital is under new ownership, without thinking about what that actually means. What it meant, apparently, was that Nicholas Vane now owned the building I spent 50 hours a week in. The parking lot where my car leaked oil every Tuesday. The second-floor lounge with the good coffee. I closed the laptop for real this time and stared at the ceiling and thought about my plan. My nursing license in 3 months, my student loans, my left shoe with the hole in it. I decided it didn't matter. I was nobody to him, a woman who spilled coffee. He'd probably forgotten me before the elevator reached his floor. He came back on Thursday. I was at the intake desk. He came through the main entrance at 7:40 a.m. Same 2 men, same jacket, different jacket, actually, same cut. And he walked directly to my desk and set down a to-go cup from a coffee shop I'd never been to. The kind with a name on the bag that I later looked up and found out had a 6-week wait list for reservations. In case you needed a replacement, he said. I stared at the cup, then at him. Mr. Vane, I said, because I didn't know what else to call him. Nicholas, you didn't have to do this, I know. He stood there for a moment, and I had the distinct sense that this was not something he did. Standing around, waiting. He looked like a man whose time was priced by the minute and who had chosen, deliberately, to spend some of it here. Thank you, I said. He nodded. Started to leave. I'm Waverly, I said. I don't know why, it just came out. Waverly Knox. In case you needed to know who you were replacing the coffee for. He turned back, that almost smile again. I know who you are, he said. He left. I sat with that for the rest of the day. He came back the following Monday, and the Monday after that. It was never a long visit. 5 minutes, maybe 10. He'd stop at the desk. We'd talk about small things at first, the weather, the hospital, a news story I'd mentioned offhand, and then he'd leave. His men would wait by the door. He never seemed to be in a hurry when he was standing at my desk, which felt strange given everything I'd read about him. I told myself it was nothing. He owned the hospital. He was probably doing routine check-ins. I was just conveniently located. But he started calling me Waves. I don't know when it started. 1 week it was Waverly, and then it was Waves, like it had always been that, like he'd decided on it privately, and was only now saying it out loud. That's not a nickname, I told him. It is now. You can't just decide that. I did, though. He was so calm about everything. I found it equal parts irritating and fascinating, the way he occupied space without any apparent effort, like gravity arranged itself around him instead of the other way around. He never fidgeted, never checked his phone. When he looked at you entirely, like you were the only thing in his field of vision. It made me talk too much. I noticed that about myself around him. I'd say things I hadn't planned to say, fill silences that probably didn't need filling, and then walk home, replaying the conversation wondering why I'd mentioned my sister's wedding, or my radiator, or the fact that I'd been reading a book about the history of Chicago hospitals, and found it genuinely interesting. You're unusual, he said one morning. Most people just say weird. Most people use the wrong word. I laughed before I could stop it. He watched me laugh like he was cataloging the sound. It was 6 weeks in when I found out what he was actually doing at the hospital. His assistant, a woman named Pierce, sharp eyes, sharper suits, pulled me aside on a Wednesday afternoon and told me there was a meeting I was requested to attend, operational review. Third floor conference room. 4 o'clock. I walked in expecting a hospital administrator update about the new ownership protocols. I was the only non-executive in the room. Nicholas was at the head of the table. He looked at me when I walked in, then back at the documents in front of him. He didn't explain why I was there. Neither did anyone else. The meeting was about St. Raphael's future, the real version of it. Vane Capital had acquired the hospital at a loss. It had been running deficits for 2 years. Staff was down, equipment was aging, and the board before the acquisition had been making decisions that benefited them specifically rather than the institution. Nicholas had a plan to restructure. New equipment in the ER, a staff incentive program, updated intake systems, and a proposed closure of the pediatric unit. I sat very still. The numbers made sense on paper. The unit ran at a loss. The volume didn't justify the overhead. From a purely financial standpoint, it was clean logic. I thought about the kids I saw come through on my shifts. I thought about the parents who brought them in at 2 a.m., with fevers and broken arms and faces tight, with the particular fear that only exists when your child is the one in pain. I raised my hand. "Waverly," Nicholas said, without looking up from his documents. Everyone turned to look at me. "The pediatric unit closure," I said. "I have a question about the community impact assessment." There was a pause. "There isn't one yet," said the CFO across the table. "Then I'd like to be part of building it." Another pause. Longer. I felt Nicholas look at me then. I didn't look back. "We'll schedule a follow-up," he said. He found me after the meeting. I was at the elevator, still running the numbers in my head, still working out what I wanted to say. "Waves." I turned. "You weren't supposed to be in that meeting to push back." "I know. You did it anyway." "Yes." He looked at me for a long moment. "Why?" "Because the community impact matters. Those families don't have another pediatric ER within 20 minutes of here. If you close that unit, you're not just cutting a financial loss. You're making a decision about who this neighborhood gets to rely on." He was quiet. He did that a lot. Went quiet in a way that felt like thinking rather than silence. "You've been here 3 years," he said. "Almost 4. You know this hospital. I know this neighborhood." He nodded slowly. "Come to my office Friday. I have a shift. After your shift." I told myself I was going because of the pediatric unit, because of the community impact assessment, because it was the right thing to do. I believed about half of that. His office wasn't in the hospital. It was in a building 12 blocks north, the kind with a lobby that made you feel like you'd wandered into the wrong tax bracket. His assistant brought me up to the 42nd floor, where the windows looked out over the city. Like it was a map he'd commissioned personally. He was on the phone when I came in. He held up one finger, "Give me a moment," and I stood at the window and looked at Chicago spreading out below us and thought about how many people were down there right now, in hospitals, in waiting rooms, in cars on the way to emergencies. He ended the call. "You prepared something," he said. Not a question. He could see the folder in my hand. I always prepare something. He sat down across from me, not behind the desk, which I noticed, and opened the folder. I'd spent 2 evenings on it. Demographic data on the surrounding zip codes. Patient volume by unit over 5 years. Alternative restructuring models that preserved pediatric care. A cost-benefit analysis I'd done by hand, because I didn't have the software his team used, but the numbers held. He read every page. "Where did you get the city data?" he asked. "Public record requests. The health department publishes annual reports. And this restructuring model, you built this yourself?" "On a spreadsheet, yeah. It's not as clean as what your team would do." "It's accurate, though. I checked it 3 times. He set down the last page and leaned back. He was looking at me the way he'd looked at me in the hallway on that first morning. Like I was something unexpected, and he was still deciding what to do with that. "I've had consultants charge me 6 figures to give me half of this," he said. "They were probably billing for the software." Something shifted in his face. Not the almost smile this time. Something more like it meant something. Waves. Nicholas. It was the first time I'd used his name directly. I watched him register it. "I'm going to ask you something," he said, "and I want you to answer honestly." "Okay. Why does this matter to you, specifically? Not the general answer." I thought about it. I could have given him the policy answer, the ethical answer, the professional answer. "My brother was born premature," I said instead. 28 weeks. He spent 11 weeks in a NICU at a hospital 3 blocks from where our mom lived. If that unit hadn't been there, I don't know if he makes it. He's 30 now, works in Detroit, has a terrible taste in movies. As I looked at him. That's why, it's not abstract to me. Nicholas was very still. He's okay, I said, because the look on his face made me want to clarify. I heard you, he said. I was thinking. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, Chicago went on being enormous and indifferent. I'm not closing the pediatric unit, he said. I exhaled. There are conditions. The restructuring has to work somewhere else. I'll need your assessment incorporated into the formal plan. I can do that. You'll need to work with my team. Fine. And Waverly. He said it deliberately, the full name, not Waves. It felt different. This doesn't change what I am. I want you to understand that. I'm not. This conversation didn't make me someone else. I looked at him. I know what you are, Nicholas. Do you? I Googled you, the first night. He didn't react. I read about the federal case, the councilman, the rumors about where your company's money comes from. I kept my voice even. I'm not naive. I don't think that's all you are. I think it's part of you. Maybe a big part. But I don't think it's the whole thing. He was quiet for a long time. Most people don't make that distinction, he said. Most people don't know you well enough to. He looked at me for a long moment, and I felt the weight of it, the particular gravity of being seen by someone who rarely lets anyone close enough to do the looking. Friday, he said finally. Dinner, not a meeting. My heart did something embarrassing. Are you asking or deciding? Asking. He paused. I'm trying asking. Okay, I said. Friday. Dinner was at a restaurant in the West Loop. He'd made the reservation under a different name, which I pretended not to notice. He held the door. He didn't look at his phone once in 3 hours. We talked about everything and nothing. He told me about growing up on the South Side, which surprised me. I'd assumed, from the suits and the building and the 42nd floor, that he'd always existed in that register. He hadn't. He told me about his mother, a school librarian, who had very specific opinions about people who didn't return books, which made me laugh harder than I expected. He asked about my nursing program, and he listened the way he listened to everything, completely, like what I was saying was the only thing in the room. I told him about my plan, the loans, the license, the 10-year map I'd drawn in my head for what my life was supposed to look like. He listened to that too. You plan everything, he said. I find it comforting. Does it work? No, but I keep doing it anyway. He smiled then. Really smiled, not the almost version, and it changed his whole face. Opened something that was usually held carefully shut. I thought, that's what he looks like when he's not guarding himself. I thought, I want to see that more. You do that, he said. What? Watch people. Process them. You think I don't notice, but you're doing it right now. I'm a future nurse. Observation is a professional skill. You were doing it before you had a professional reason. He wasn't wrong. There were things about him I had to decide whether I could hold. He told me some of them directly, in pieces, over the weeks that followed carefully, the way you hand someone something breakable to see if they'll drop it. His company did things that existed in gray areas. Some of those gray areas were very gray. There were people in his world who moved through it, the way his men at the hospital moved. Alert, silent, keeping a distance between him and certain kinds of trouble. He had made decisions early in his life that had built him into something specific, and you couldn't become that thing and then simply step out of it one day because you had dinner with someone who challenged your real estate decisions. I knew that. I also knew, and this was the part I had to sit with, turn over, examine honestly, that knowing something and walking away from it are not the same choices. I thought about what my mother would say. I thought about my brother in Detroit with his bad taste in movies. He's alive at 30 because a hospital unit stayed open. I thought about what it meant to be certain about a person versus certain about their history. I'm not going to tell you what to do, my friend Bia said, when I finally told her, but I will say that the way you talk about him sounds like someone who's trying to talk yourself out of something you've already decided. She was right. I hated that she was right. He called me Waves in front of his assistant one morning, and Pierce raised her eyebrows by exactly 2 millimeters, which I suspected was her version of a standing ovation. He started showing up at my apartment building sometimes, not inside, just outside, leaning against the car with the kind of studied casualness that fooled nobody, including him. He'd bring food. Good food, always. The kind I would never have thought to order for myself, and we'd sit on the front steps like two completely normal people, which we were not, and talk until it was late enough that I had to be up in 5 hours. "You're going to make me ruin my sleep schedule," I told him one night. "Your sleep schedule was already a public health concern." "That's rude. It's accurate." He looked at me sideways. "You should be sleeping more. You should be sleeping more. When do you sleep?" "I'm working on it." He said it like he meant something else. The thing that almost broke it happened in January. It came out in a news cycle. Not about Nicola's directly, but about a company 2 layers removed from Vane Capital. A logistics operation that had been moving things across the border that should not have been moved. Federal investigation. His name wasn't in the article, but his company's name was adjacent to a name that was. I read it at 6 a.m. at my kitchen table with cold coffee in my hand. He called me at 6:15. "You saw it," he said. "Yes. I want to explain it to you. Are you able to?" A pause. "Some of it." I sat with that. The honest answer would have been, "I'm scared. Not of him, not exactly, but of the shape of this situation and what it meant to be inside it." I was 26. I had loans and a plan and a shoe with a hole in it. I was not built for whatever this was. But I also thought about the way he'd listened to me talk about my brother. The way he'd reversed the decision about the pediatric unit. Quietly, without announcement, just done it and moved on. The way he looked when he was not guarding himself. "Come over," I said. "We'll talk." He was there in 20 minutes. He explained what he could explain, which was not everything, and he was honest about the parts he couldn't explain, which I think was harder for him. He didn't minimize it, or tell me I was wrong to be concerned. He sat across from me at my kitchen table and said, "This is what it is. I am trying to make it different over time. I cannot promise you it is already different." "I know," I said. "That might not be enough. I know that too." We sat in the particular quiet of 2 people deciding something. "I'm not going anywhere," I said finally, "but I need you to keep being honest with me, even when it's the hard version." Waves. His voice was different when he said it that time. "Yeah. I don't know how to do most of this. I want you to know that. I'm doing it anyway." I thought that might have been the most honest thing anyone had ever said to me. My nursing license came through in February. Nicholas took me to dinner at a place I recognized from a magazine, which I found both touching and completely ridiculous. I wore the only dress I owned that felt appropriate for the occasion, which I'd bought on sale and taken in myself. He wore a suit that cost more than my monthly rent and looked at me like I was the more impressive thing in the room. "Registered nurse, Waverly Knox," he said. "Don't make it weird. It's not weird. It's significant. I'm aware. I'm the one who did it." He smiled. "The real one. I know. That's what I mean." I reached across the table and put my hand over his. He looked down at it, then up at me. "I want to say something," I said. "Okay, I know who you are. The whole thing, not just the parts you show me. I've thought about it a lot. Maybe too much, probably. And I need you to know that I'm here with all of it. Not because I think you're already different, but because I think you're capable of being different. And I think you want to be. And I think that's worth." I stopped. Took a breath. "I think that's worth showing up for." He was very still. "I've spent a lot of my life," he said slowly, "making sure people couldn't get close enough to see anything clearly. It was safer that way. For them, mostly. For me, probably." He paused. "You walked into an elevator and spilled coffee on my jacket and asked to see my hand to check if I was burned. I was being professionally thorough. You were being you." He turned his hand over under mine. "You've been you this entire time. I didn't know what to do with it. I still don't, mostly." He met my eyes. "But I'm not going back to before this. I want you to know that. Whatever this is, whatever I have to change to make it worth your time, I'm not going back." Outside the window, Chicago was doing what Chicago does in February, cold and dark, and absolutely certain of itself. But at that table, in that light, something felt less like a plan and more like a beginning. I squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. And that, I think, was when I stopped worrying about whether this made sense on paper and started paying attention to how it felt to be in it. Which was something like terrifying, and something like coming home, and something like a door opening into a room I hadn't known was there.